Well, welcome to episode 6, everybody. This week we are featuring our guest star, Tony Latter, who is our head of innovation at the Happiness Index. So welcome, Tony. And I'm really excited to have him on today because we're going to be speaking about just the importance of happiness in the workplace, which I know many of you already know how important it is, but I think what Tony's going to be sharing is a new perspective on it. And also just really effective ways to get feedback from your people. So Tony, I'd like to just hand it over to you. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit and kick off.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen, and really this kind of kicked off with one of our clients who's been using one of our products called Employee Voice, just saying that they had really strong adoption in the early days, but over time it's kind of gradually fallen off. And we put a presentation together for them, which we gave to their people. Then Rosie and Lucy were really helping me with that, putting it together. And then we felt it was something that was useful that we could use internally. And then Rosie was like, oh, this would be great for Happiness and Humans as well. So that's why kind of we're talking about it today. And the key thing is that I'll open up with this question of, is happiness a fluffy metric? And one of the things that we often hear is that people aren't really sure what we mean by this question. And I think the reason why is because people aren't always sure what happiness means. And the reason why people get a bit confused about it being a metric is they're not really sure about how you can actually measure it and how can you turn it into a data point. So we'll go through some of the research that sits behind it and the importance of feedback and so on as we go. If you've got any questions as we're going, if you could just pop them in the chat, and then Rosie and I will do a bit of a Q&A towards the end as well. And if we've got some questions from the chat, great. If not, we'll just take them at that time. So just kind of as an introduction, so my name's Tony Latter and I'm one of the co-founders of the Happiness Index. So I co-founded the business with Matt Phelan, who most of you know, and also another guy called Chris Highland back in 2014. And other than just the what it takes to run a business, and kind of my co-founder roles, my day-to-day role is as head of happiness innovation. And what that means is I get to play a lot and experiment, problem solve, work out what's well and feel the elation when something works, have that emotional roller coaster when you think something's going to work and then it doesn't, and then that resilience and how do we make it into something that is going to be really useful for our communities and for our people as well. And I think this is really one of the starting points of, I absolutely love my role. And it's got so much enjoyment and personal fulfillment. And I think whenever we talk about happiness at work, it's really important that people just enjoy what they do. So I think that's kind of like one of the first key takeaways from this. So what we're going to do now is just very quickly get the view from the room. So I always like opening with this question of who thinks happiness is a fluffy metric. So in the chat box, could you just put yes if you think it is fluffy and no if you think it isn't fluffy? I can't see the chat box at the moment because I'm in presenting mode, but I know that Rosie's keeping an eye on it. So I'll give you guys about another 10 seconds. And then Rosie, if you can just give us a quick summary of what you're seeing, that'd be great.
Sounds good. So far, it's all no's.
Okay. That's amazing. I was kind of hoping it would be in this group because kind of we're a bit self-selecting in this group because we're all part of Happiness and Humans community. When I've done this with clients in the past, often, most of the time it's 50-50 in the room. Other times I had one where actually it was all, yeah, we think it's fluffy. That was a bit of a tough gig. But we worked it out and we kind of proved the importance of it. So the great thing is that you guys are kind of fully on board with happiness as a really positive and powerful metric. And some of the things that we'll talk through now, just to help kind of reinforce that message, will be just some of the bits of the research that we use. And for those of you who can see the screen, would have, or maybe even have read this book, Freedom to Be Happy, The Business Case for Happiness, which is what Matt was working on. Lots of the research that we're just going to touch on now features in that book. And this is a guy called Professor Alex Edmonds. And he ran a study, he called it 28 Years of Data. And what that looks at is, he's from a professor at London Business School, and this is him doing his TED talk. And what he looked at the 100 best companies to work for in America, and just went through 28 years worth of data. And what he found was those firms with high employee satisfaction outperformed their peers by about 2.3 to 3.8% per year. Which, when you look at it at an individual year basis, that's nice, but that's not groundbreaking, but that's certainly nice to have. The real power came when you accumulated this over those 28 years. The stock returns were between 89% and 184% higher than those that didn't have that higher levels of employee satisfaction, those employee happiness levels. And even once you start taking out some of the controlling factors that drove those returns, it was still really consistent that across industries, it didn't matter. If you still put in the higher levels of satisfaction, focused on staff happiness, you saw those returns coming throughout. And what was really interesting was just this really simple fact of focusing on employee satisfaction, putting happiness at the heart of what you do, significantly impacted financial performance. And I know in this room, we don't need to make that case because we all have had everybody saying that it's not a fluffy metric, but that doesn't mean that we don't come up against other people, either in our business or when we're talking to others. So having something like this is really good for talking to those people who are quite rationally minded and want to know numbers and actually, well, what will it do for a business in terms of performance? This is a really nice bit of research that does that. The next bit of research is from one of my favorite films, even though it's a Pixar film, and I watched this with my children, and it's incredible looking at how children will react to the characters and how they will use these characters to explain what they feel. And one of the things that has been really powerful is the little red guy here with his head on fire, his anger. And what's been really good is kind of from a personal perspective, we've been able to kind of teach our children that it's okay to feel these emotions and it's okay to share them. And actually, we shouldn't be afraid of our emotions. They're really important. But it's the next bit that we need to be aware of. It's okay to feel anger, but how do you then channel that anger into a positive way? And one of the things that we found with a piece of research was that if you try to hide your emotions and you don't have an outlet for them, your performance starts to suffer. The cognitive resource that we take to try and suppress emotions means that it's not there for things like task completion or problem solving. So the more that we try to suppress how we feel at work, because either we're in a culture or an environment that doesn't encourage it, or you feel you don't have that kind of the cognitive safety, that psychological safety to be able to share how you feel, because if you did that, you're afraid of how people would think. That has a massive impact on how we will perform and how we will work within the workplace. I think one of the reasons why it's this irony that people will try to hide their emotions because they think it will help them perform better in the workplace or it will help them progress in their careers. And actually, it's the complete opposite. It starts to hinder our performance. It starts to stop us from progressing because we're having to suppress what we think and what we feel as to not upset people. Now, this doesn't mean that we should go around and kind of just tell everybody carte blanche what we think of them. But we should certainly be thinking about how can we have constructive conversations with people where maybe there is an issue. How can we do that? How can we use the people teams or our management structures within our businesses to help us share what our emotions are, but use it as a force for good in order to drive that positive change?
Tony, we had a question from the audience. Margarita was wondering where that research came from.
Yeah, so we'll share that with you, Margarita. I know that we've got all of the details. I haven't got that specific piece here, but I'll bring it back and we'll share that with you before the end, because I know that it's important that we provide the sources for that. So I'll make sure I'll have it by the end and I'll pop that in the chat for us. The next one is a piece of research that was done by this lady on the left-hand side. So this is a lady called Sonia Lubomirsky, and her research looked at whether happiness is nature or nurture. And I think it's being truthful, it's an element of both. And what's really interesting here is that from the nature side, around 50% of how we view happiness is our genetic makeup. It's within our DNA. You know that you'll meet people that are naturally happier than others. But what's really interesting is 10% is made up of our life circumstances. So what are our experiences that shape us as we go through kind of childhood into adulthood? There's 10% there that has an impact on our happiness. But the amazing thing is there's still 40% down to how we think. And that's incredible because as HR professionals, it's amazing that we're able to then shape that thought process, the environment that affects how people feel. So often when we talk around happiness, particularly in the early days, if we go back to 2014 when we first started the company, first of all, people weren't really sure why it mattered. And then the second most question I was asked is, but we can't do anything about it, can we? People are either happy or they're not. But the great bit about this research is, yeah, we do have some of it, which is our nature side, that's our genetic makeup. But actually 40% is down to our nurturing of our environment, of what we're in. And as we spend a lot of time at work, it's around the relationships, the physical environments we work in. It's things like, as we've moved into a Zoom culture and remote working, actually, how do we still, or how are we able to affect how people are thinking and feeling through the environment? Because we can absolutely still do that. So I think that's a really interesting piece of research about how the nurturing of the environment and our relationships is really important. Now, it's not often that I would call a slide within a talk the same as the talk itself, but the reason I do that for this piece of research is just purely down to the power, and this is the ultimate in why happiness isn't a fluffy metric. So the guy that's here in this picture is a guy called Jeremy Dawson, and he ran a study into the NHS in the UK that showed the more positive the experiences for the staff within that NHS trust, the better the outcomes were for patients. So what his research was able to show was that if there were better experiences, a more positive environment, happier staff, the death rates were lower in those NHS trusts. So this isn't a 1, 2, 3% increase on performance because we've made people happy. This is fundamentally lowering death rates. It's lowering infection rates. It's providing patients with better satisfaction and better experiences in hospitals. Now, that's an incredibly powerful piece of research that I think is the ultimate. And I always find it fascinating how happiness at such an extent can actually physically save lives. Then the next piece of research that we looked at with this particular client was actually just kind of taking them on a bit of a journey and actually trying to prove the case for actually it's really important that we understand happiness at its core level. So happiness is an emotion and it's the feeling. It speaks to our hearts and it's what provides us with our energy. I think for years and years, we've always looked at engagement as the panacea. If we can get people engaged, we will drive better performance for our organizations. And engagement is part of the story. It's not the entire story. So engagement is about purpose and clarity, and it speaks to our brains and gives us our direction. But it's really important that as humans, we have two data sources in our body. One is what we think, and the other one is what we feel. And we have sayings in our cultures around it where people will say, I'm going to let my head rule my heart. And that's because people are torn between, do I make a decision with my emotions or with my brain and how I'm thinking? So we know it happens. But as humans, we'd be crazy not to listen to two sets of data to try and inform how we should make a decision. And as a business, it's even worse that you wouldn't take into account the collective thoughts and feelings of your people. By understanding happiness and in particular emotions, what we're able to do is understand how people see the world at that point in time. That doesn't necessarily mean that how they are seeing the world is the same for everybody. But if we can understand how, say, as an example at the happiness index, I'll take the people on the call. If we can understand how Rosie is feeling at this point in time, how Lucy, how Mark is, how I am, what's our collective feeling? That's incredibly powerful for us as a business, because we're then able to support our people better. And if you take kind of like a car analogy, imagine a car. Engagement is the sat nav and it gives us our direction. And happiness is our fuel because it's our energy. There's no point knowing where we need to go if we don't have the fuel to get there. So it's really important that we take into consideration both elements. Start connecting the heart and the brain together, and start taking into account how people think and about how people feel. So at this point, again, it's just the view from the room, and I would like to think that people would know that happiness is important, given the fact that we at the beginning had a room that all felt it wasn't a fluffy metric. Hopefully what I've told you now hasn't convinced you the other way, and that it's not important. So again, if you can just put yes if you think happiness isn't important, or no if you think that it is. If you could just put that into the chat. Again, Rosie, I can't see it, so let's maybe give another 10 seconds and just see what we've got coming through there. Have we got anything coming through, Rosie?
Yeah, everybody's again saying no. Okay. Margarita did say that she thinks the problem is the concept of happiness is not clear.
Yeah.
I think that's that definitely a lot of people have an issue with, bringing up this idea to leadership boards, is that, I mean, happiness is really subjective. And so trying to explain the importance of it into the workplace definitely can be a problem. Has anybody actually had an experience changing somebody's mind on bringing happiness into the workplace before? I'm just curious to see if anybody's had this challenge and overcome it, and how you did it. And Maria said she has a little bit this year.
Yeah. So yeah. Rosie, would it help a little bit if we if I kind of gave a bit of what we at the happiness index consider to be happiness from the cultural assessment?
Yeah.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so with our cultural assessment, that's a bit about connecting the heart and the brain. So we look at two areas. We look at happiness and we look at engagement. We use neuroscience to help us with that. So our model is mapped against neuroscience, and we have looked at happiness is the emotional side. So within our brain types, that's trying to appeal to our instinctive side and to our emotional side. So the ways in which we look at that, and how I would explain what happiness in the workplace looks like, first of all, is around safety. So as an example, we will all make an assessment whenever we walk into a room of, am I safe? Physically, do we feel safe? And it happens within seconds. We wouldn't even necessarily know that we're processing that within our brain. It just kind of happens. Then the next part of safety is actually, now that I feel safe, do I feel like I have the ability to explore? Do I feel like I've got that now safety is taken care of? Can I have that freedom to start exploring? And once I can start exploring, that's when I can start understanding a little bit more about what's happening in the environment. What would it be like if I was to put kind of an opinion forward? Do I have that psychological safety that people talk about a lot, in terms of, if I say something, am I going to get shot down? Will people listen to me? And that's really important at a core level. The next part is when we go into the emotional side of the brain. That's when we start thinking about things such as our relationships. So do we have healthy relationships? Are our relationships positive with people? We also start looking at acknowledgement as well, because acknowledgement is really good for kind of helping us connect or attach to something. So that might be a cause or our environment or the people that we work with. So if we're ticking off those boxes, that's where we start to look at kind of that deeper rooted happiness. Happiness in the workplace absolutely isn't beers on a Friday and putting beanbags everywhere and putting a table tennis table in. It'll help, but that's not what happiness is. For happiness sits much deeper within us at our core and within the way in which we think and we feel. So that's how we would articulate what happiness is in the workplace. Does anyone have any kind of comments or questions about that before we move on?
Valerie says table tennis and wine make her very happy.
Yeah, the more beer and table tennis tables, the better for me, Tone.
Oh, without a doubt, it definitely helps. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't, but we see it so often where people will try to look for a quick fix, and you'll get a bit of a boost, but fundamentally deep down, to get these lasting and sustainable levels of happiness, you need to look deeper than that. The next bit I was just going to talk about is just around the importance of feedback. And this is something that we used with a particular client, just to try and get their people to realize why it's important. So this idea kind of comes from this book. I don't know if anyone's read it. It's a chap called Matthew Syed, and the book's called Rebel Ideas, The Power of Diverse Thinking. And it's about cognitive diversity. And he talks about this concept of the problem space. So this is the rectangle that we got here. And if one person is trying to solve a problem or is feeding back on a problem, you'll see a very small part of that problem space gets filled, because that individual has their frame of reference. It's how they see the issue through their eyes. And then when we expand that and we say, right, let's get more feedback, and let's just say everybody from this person's team provides their feedback, we're going to get something that looks like this, where we're now getting collective frames of reference. But because we're getting them from very kind of people who work in a similar area of a business, they're going to view the issue in a very similar way, but they will have slightly different views of that, because how I would view an issue may be different to, say, Rosie, to Mark, to Lucy. So let's just take it back a little bit, and let's just say that communication is an issue for a business. This person might think that we've got too many communication channels. Then the rest of that person's team also agrees. Do you know what? We've got WhatsApp, we've got Slack, we've got Teams, we've got email, we've got loads of channels going on. I'm a bit confused about which channels I use for what. But the idea and the reason why it's important to get high levels of feedback coming in from all areas of the business is because the more feedback that we get, the more the problem space starts to fill up. So as a people team, people have got more information to go on. They can start solving the deeper lying issues. So let's just take that example of communication. We've got all of those frames of reference that are around too many communication channels. But elsewhere in the business, it may be a different location. It might be that the management or the leadership aren't particularly visible, or there's a lack of clarity in the communication. People are unsure who to go to for certain things. So there's a breakdown in this kind of the communication. So if we go back here, the people team for this business might go, okay, great, we've got a communication issue. We've got too many channels. We're going to remove a couple of channels. We've solved our communication issue. And even in this example, they might think, okay, yeah, we've solved the communication issue. We stripped out a couple of channels. It's great. We've got that firing. But in this scenario, they haven't solved the communication issue. They've solved what they know is the issue. And that's why it's really important that when people are providing the feedback, they're the eyes and the ears of the organization. They're the ones that are able to identify where these issues are. And you can't resolve issues if you don't know it's an issue. So it's really important that organizations, through whatever mechanisms, are embracing feedback. There's this regular conversational style, whether it's something such as our employee voice proposition. It's just really important that we get this level of feedback coming into a business. Now, we do it through employee voice, and I think this kind of comes back to, we had at the beginning, is happiness a fluffy metric? And we had that bit around, well, people aren't quite sure what happiness is. And we kind of answered that question through what we use within our cultural assessment. The next point is, well, actually, how do you measure it? How can you use emotion as a data point? And how can you use happiness as a data point? And some of you may be familiar with our employee voice. You may be using it or have heard us talk about it in the past. But employee voice is one of those unique propositions, which is at any point in time, you're able to tell us or tell your organization how you are feeling today. And the idea behind it is that it just taps into the emotional side of our brains and starts getting people to talk from the heart. They would put a rating between 1 and 10 of how they're feeling, and then they'd put a comment in there just explaining why they feel that way. And it's not about trying to rationalize it or have any real deep essence of why they're feeling like that. It's more just a case to give a little bit of context so that people in the people teams are kind of understanding a little bit why not only is a department or a location, but why is the business feeling as they currently are? What's the context that sits behind it? I think that's incredibly powerful because it's a really quick way for people to provide feedback. We can start to use the score as a data point. We can use the comment as a data point, and we use artificial intelligence to help us understand. We use keyword analysis. We run some sentiment analysis behind it to understand whether people are talking about things positively or negatively. So it's a really powerful way to feed this information back into a business. And then the next bit is, well, actually, how can people start engaging with employee voice? And there's lots of different mechanisms. And I think this, when we ran this with this particular client, they ran it all through laptop and desktop, but really the majority of their workforce were on the go a lot. So one of their challenges that they had was about how do we get it to where our people are, rather than try and take the people from where they are currently working and try and get them to a laptop. How can we just push it out to them? How can we get people feedback in a way that it suits their working environment, suits the way in which they work? And I think that's really important. And whatever mechanism, whether you're using our employee voice or you've got another mechanism for feedback, or you haven't even really thought about this, I think this is something that's really important, that we get people to kind of think about how do we take the feedback to the individual. Mobile is really popular. So I have on my phone a THI logo there. When I click on that, I can provide our employee voice feedback at any point in time. So I could just go in here, I could give a rating, I could give a score, and it's just there for when I want to use it. I think it's really important that when we run programs, that kind of, I was trying to explain to our head of robots, we were talking, I was trying to explain that it's not like we're in the old world, we'd have a party and we'd invite everyone to come to our party. Actually, what we're doing here is it's saying it doesn't matter where you are, we'll take the party to you. And it's about engaging in ways with people where they're comfortable and where they're used to working and operating. And we see that as a massive kind of increase in adoption when we take things like feedback to people rather than asking them to come to us. Now, I just wanted to kind of leave you with a few headline themes before we kind of go into a little bit of a Q&A. So we haven't got much left in the talk, but just really wanted to kind of talk through some of the things that we're seeing from our employee voice feedback. So all of that feedback that we get coming into us from all of our clients using it, we anonymize it, and it's a great source of benchmarking data for us to understand how people are feeling. And something that was really interesting is we're now currently going through all of the data from October, but this goes up until September. And what's been really interesting is, since lockdown started in March, the happiness levels, they've remained below the pre-COVID levels. So pre-COVID, the average was 7.6. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody that we're not at that level now. But what was really interesting is it went down, it started to come up over the summer. And when we were in August, people were starting to feel more positive again. We were gradually going back to whatever this kind of new normal was going to look like. And people felt optimistic. They felt like, oh, great, can get back into the working environment. I know that life's not going to be the same, but it might be similar. And there was a lot of positivity. And then with September, we started to see a big increase coming through in the number of COVID cases. Local lockdowns started to come in as well. And I think the main drivers when we dug into the detail here was we started to look at people are starting to feel increased levels of stress and anxiety because of the rising number of cases. So there are some external factors there that were driving the sentiment of people. They could say, well, as a business, what can we do about that? If cases of COVID are going to go up, we can't really stop that as a business. But the point is, it's not about trying to stop it, but it's about trying to make your people feel better. So if your people do need to come into work, what are the things that you can do to make sure that they feel comfortable doing that? What are the things that you can promote? What are the types of things that you can say, like reassure people that, look, don't come into work if you don't feel comfortable? What can you do to enable people to work from a different location, whether that's around equipment or the resources that they need? Do they have access to the teams, to people? Do they have access to software that they need? All of these things just to help equip people. There's confusion over kind of these lockdown rules that were going on at the time around, I may work in an area that doesn't have a lockdown, but I live in an area that does. What does this mean for people personally and professionally, and how can companies help with that? Things like missing the working environment and this social interaction. People felt that they were starting to get that back in August, but now it's taken away in September. And from the kind of very initial analysis that we've done, that's continued into October as well, and no doubt will go into November. This part around connection for people is really important. So across all of our clients that are running our cultural assessment, two main areas tend to come out. One is around the connection, this sense of belonging. Do I feel connected to the people I work with? Do I feel connected to my organization? That comes with things like the vision, the values, the relationships that people have. Then the next part of that is about the meaning and the purpose. Do I feel what I'm doing has a meaning? Is it purposeful? And what we've found in all of our data since COVID is that people are reassessing what is purposeful, what gives them meaning. People are kind of reevaluating that, and that's something that's really interesting. The next bit is about feelings. So there is a greater appetite for people to share their feelings than there has been pre-COVID. And what's been something that's really consistent since COVID is that people have wanted to share more. They are looking for an outlet in which to share. And employee voice for our clients that have got that has been something that's been really positive for them. So what we've seen is, on average, pre-COVID, the average comment length was about 17 words. Now it's doubling that. It's up to about 34 words. So in around 70% of all comments that are being made, they're twice as long now as they were before. And that's because people don't have the ability to have those conversations in a kitchen or over lunch or at a water cooler. Or the bit that I miss sometimes about being able to share with people is, before I have a meeting with anybody, we'll go to the kitchen, we'll grab a drink, we'll make a tea or a coffee, whatever it may be. We just start having a bit of a general conversation. And I miss that part. And there are millions of people around the world that miss that and needed and wanted an outlet in order to share. So for you guys to think about the companies that you work in or with, what mechanisms do they have that allow people to do that? Because we're understanding that there's a greater emphasis and appetite to share, but do people have the ability to do that? Then we're just going to go on to some of the key themes that we've seen coming through. And I think what's really interesting is, on the left are some of the negative themes that we're seeing coming through in our feedback. Uncertainty and despair. And I can honestly say I have felt every single one of these at some point during the last 6-7 months. That uncertainty, that despair of, okay, I don't know what the near future is going to hold, or what the future, like the distant future, the short term and long term at the moment, what's that look like? And definitely we've seen that with people where they're feeling this level of uncertainty. So what, as businesses, can we do, given the environment we're in, to at least give some element of certainty and clarity to people? Stress and anxiety, a big one at the moment, is we're seeing people worried about Christmas. How's it going to be different this year? Even going into what we've seen over the last couple of days, that there's talk about we might be able to have a normal Christmas, but for every day where we have a normal Christmas, potentially there's a trade-off of 5 days of lockdown coming in January. So again, this is causing some stress and some anxiety, and how as businesses can we support people through that. Confusion, lack of clarity. What does this mean? People feeling confused, fed up, what's okay, what's not okay. Some companies have been amazing in the way that they communicate with their people, and others have been really poor. This social interaction, this workplace environment, people feeling we're just getting back to normal. I'm going to be able to see people again, get some form of routine. And as humans, as a race, we tend to like a routine. We tend to want to know what's happening. It's how we've evolved over years and years and thousands of years of evolution. At the moment, that's being all ripped up at the moment. We've got no real certainty. We're social creatures as well. So as humans, we have this social interaction. But again, that's being challenged in lots of ways as well. On the positive side, work-life balance is incredibly important for people. And actually, people are tending to find they've got a lot more flexibility now than they have done before. It can have a real impact on the relationships that they have with people. I don't mind sharing a kind of a personal example of that. Before lockdown, I was in London 4 days a week. I'd leave my house at 6:30 in the morning. I wouldn't see my wife or 2 children until I got home in the evening. My wife was having to get the kids up, get them their breakfast, take them to school. They're 5, they're 7. That's hard. Doing that day in, day out, and just knowing that you're not going to get any support until later on in the evening. And it's been incredible for me because I'm playing a bigger part in my children's lives. I'm taking them to school. I'm getting them ready in the morning. I'm spending more time with them than I ever have done. And that's incredible. And for the relationship that I have with my wife as well, our relationship's got so much better now because we're working as a team. Being parents is about being a team and being able to share those responsibilities. And as much as I wanted to do that before, I kind of felt like I was always having to choose between growing the Happiness Index and my role as a founder, as head of happiness innovation. And there was always some form of conflict. And the amazing thing is I don't feel that now. That's incredibly empowering. The next piece is around autonomy. So lots of autonomy. The way in which people work is changing. They don't have this micromanagement. You don't have people looking over your shoulder with remote working. People being able to work to a schedule that suits them. An amazing phrase that one of our clients shared with us is that we are at home living through a pandemic and trying to work. We're not trying to work from home with a pandemic. Their emphasis is we're in a pandemic situation. Things are difficult. You are trying to work in the best way and we will help support you in the best way we can. Particularly when schools were shut, we saw a lot of this conflicting of, I need to homeschool my children, but I've also got to work. And having this more autonomy in the ways that we were working has created some really real positives. Gratitude and support is something that is quite new, I would say, in what we are seeing, certainly from Western cultures. We do a lot of work with Indian organizations, and gratitude is something that is ingrained within their culture. It's not so much in the West, and it's really interesting that we're seeing that coming through, which is a really lovely thing to see. And then we've got things like communication as well. We talked earlier, companies not being particularly good, either a lack of clarity or a lack of noise, pulling up the drawbridge because they just don't know what to say, not being able to talk about challenges, or people asking questions such as, when are we going back into the office? And people hiding from those. We've also seen lots and lots of companies who have just been amazing, really clear, really empathetic, really helpful, really reassuring for their people. And the final bit, really, just to kind of talk through, is about closing that feedback loop. And I don't know about you guys, but we see this a lot with the companies that we work with, something that we regularly get fed back when we're doing talks or we're presenting at events, that often people feel that there's a parental relationship, that it's down to the organization to solve all of these issues, that as an employee, I have an issue, so I'm going to look to my people team to solve that issue for me. And I know from speaking with thousands of HR professionals over the course of like the last 6 years, this is one of the things that people really want to start to change. They want people to see that they are the part of the solution. Providing feedback is the first line of being part of the solution. By understanding and helping identify what our issues are as organizations, that's starting to put us on the path to finding a solution. And I think this is something that's really important, is how do people want feedback fed back to them? So it's one thing for organizations to get all of this feedback, but actually, how do they want the results back? Is it a town hall? Is it a video? Is it an email? Is it a newsletter? Is it a 3 bullet point summary on whatever chat mechanism they use, whether that's Teams or Slack, WhatsApp, whatever it may be? And again, it's about how do we take the impact of this feedback back out to people in a mechanism that works for them. Once initiatives are in place and people have shared that there's an issue, actually, people have got a part to play in that solution, not only in identifying it, but then once an issue has been identified and the solution's in place, what are the next steps? And what we mean by that is, once a solution is out there and an initiative is being used, what do you like about it? What could be built upon? Yeah, it's a good start, but it'd be great if we could do this. If you don't think it's going to work, that's where this feedback is continuous. This is why it's a feedback loop and not just a linear, we've raised a problem, we've got a solution, because it all feeds into that dynamic, and it's about closing that feedback loop, which is massively important. Now, I know we had the question earlier from Margarita around where did the piece of research come from around emotions and emotions hindering performance. So I'll grab that link for you in a moment. But all of the stuff that we've spoken about today is in this book, so that Matt put together. We've also got it in the Happiness is Humans podcast. So every bit that we've mentioned today, there's a podcast piece, and they're normally around 20 to 25 minutes long, that will take you through that research. So again, if you want to head back into understand a little bit more, there's another place that you can go as well. Now, I'm not going to ask this question because this I think I know what the answer is going to be to this one, but normally we'd close this type of survey with seeing whether we've made some progress and where we've shifted the view in the room through what we've spoken about. But bearing in mind where we started, I think we'll skip this bit, Rosie, and then we'll just jump into that Q&A.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you, Tony. That was fantastic. Also, I'll post a link to the podcast in our Happiness in Humans community if anybody wants to listen. So I guess if anybody had any questions, feel free to ask. I'd like to just start off with, I get this question a lot from the HR professionals that I've spoken to, and it's just around when you're gathering feedback and you have that open space for people to share feedback with you, there's going to be some negative stuff that comes out that you can't do anything about. So why would you even ask that question? And I guess a lot of people are just wondering, like, there's things you can't do anything about, some stuff like COVID as an example.
Yeah.
So I guess, Tony, if you'd like to answer that, just, I know I didn't ask it very well, but
Yeah.
just in that wide
feedback. I think it's really important because it's about understanding how they're seeing the world. And that's why that question is phrased as, how are you feeling today? And there may be some responses that we can't do anything about as a business. But it's surprising as a business how much we can support people. So I took that example about COVID earlier, that, yeah, we can't control COVID cases. We can't control how much they're spiking in our countries on a kind of a national level. But what we can do is we can listen to people. We can understand how they feel. We can be empathetic. We can share with them how we could potentially help. Doesn't mean we're always going to solve the issue, but the amazing thing is sometimes it's not even about solving the issue. Sometimes it's just listening. And this is something that kind of one of the things that I love doing more than anything else is going to my mum and dad's house and sitting down and having a cup of tea with my mum, because she just asked me how I'm feeling and she'll just listen. And she won't necessarily know how to help me solve an artificial intelligence problem. But she will listen and she will just help me and maybe provide a little bit of like, oh, is there anyone else you could talk to about that? And she just knows what the right questions to say are. And I think that's kind of what we want to try and bring into that more human element to how we can use technology, how we can understand. We often call it emotional intelligence at scale. We can't do that with every individual within a business, but what we can do is we can certainly try and understand, try and work out how they're seeing the world, why are they seeing the world in that way at that point in time. If there's enough people who feel like that, what can we do to help? And yeah, I think I'm just having a look on the chat here, and I think Becca, yeah, it's just listening to learn, not to fix. I think that's a really good point. I hope you don't mind, but I'm probably going to steal that at some point and use that one. But that's what it is. It's just about being there. And I'm sure we can all understand as humans when we've been in a situation where you just feel like you want to be included. You just feel like you want to have a voice. You just want to get it off your chest. And that's one of the amazing things about, like, why do people write diaries? And it's because it's cathartic. You share how you feel. The thought of writing down your most personal feelings in a space where people could then go and read it. I've got a little picture baby here. All right, my nephew's come running into the room. So he's 18 months old. So it's always not like the power of working from home. But yeah, it's amazing. It's just listening, just being able there to help. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. That's, yeah. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Tony? Or any comments? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah.
Just what Tony was saying about writing a diary. So I've just put in the chat box that I actually journal. So I'm on my 12th one since Christmas 2014. And I always think, oh my God, I don't want my kids or anyone to read this because it's got basically all my thoughts, the good, the bad, the ugly. But it's just so good to get it out so I can speak to myself. I'm my own kind of therapist, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Lorna, can we have a session where you talk us through your journal for the last 6 years? I think it'd be amazing.
Sure.
But you're right, it's incredibly powerful, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I like that title, Maria.
That's your next book, Lorna.
My next book, yeah.
Or blog post.
Yeah. That'd be long. Oh my gosh.
Does anyone else have any questions? Rosie, do you have any others?
No, that was it for me, Tony. I am conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes left, but I just want to say thank you, Tony, for jumping on the call today and talking us through that. I know that we all know the importance of happiness and gathering feedback from your people, but it's just great the way that you talked us through it, and the science behind it especially is just a great case for us. So thanks very much. And our next episode, no problem. And our next episode on the 4th is going to be featuring Natasha Wallace. She'll be talking to us about conscious leadership and the research that she's done. It's incredibly interesting. She shared with me a few snippets of it. So really excited to share that with you all. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Rosie. See you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.